All right, let me get this off my chest. I never thought I'd be the guy to nuke my entire family, especially not my older brother. But here we are. I didn't plan. It didn't even fantasize about it, at least not seriously. But after decades of being the family's overlooked second son, the one they politely tolerated at dinners while pouring praise on my brother, it just happened. And honestly, I don't regret a damn thing. For context, I'm Nate, 33, stubborn, grease-stained, and the guy my family always considered the lesser son. Then there's Jason, 35, corporate hotshot golden child and the family's pride and joy. If you asked my parents, I'm sure they'd swear I came out of the womb holding a wrench and a bad attitude, while Jason practically emerged in a tailored suit, briefcase in hand. Growing up, we were close at least until Jason discovered he could charm his way through life, while I preferred building things with my hands. By middle school, our paths had already split. Jason was the one making touchdowns and student council speeches while I was tearing apart lawnmower engines just to see how they worked. My parents, of course, adored his achievements. Football MVP, they threw a party, honor roll, framed the report card. Meanwhile, I came home one day with a rebuilt motorcycle engine I'd restored from scrap. And the only comment I got was my mom muttering, "Try not to track oil on the carpet." High school only made the gap worse. Jason landed a football scholarship to a prestigious business program, while I scraped by saving every penny to buy junkyard parts for my project bikes. He graduated, took a cushy marketing job straight out of college, and climbed the corporate ladder with the same ease. I twisted bolts. Meanwhile, I built my own auto customization shop from the ground up, taking over a failing local garage and turning it into a serious operation. Despite my success, my family never saw it. They called it my garage hobby, as if rebuilding engines and fabricating high-performance parts was just a phase I'd outgrow. They'd nod and smile when I mentioned new projects, but would pivot back to Jason's latest promotion within seconds. I remember one Thanksgiving, Jason rolled up in a brand new luxury SUV, a company perk, no less. He was in a crisp blazer, his watch flashing like a beacon as he clapped me on the shoulder. His grin so wide I could practically see his molars. Still playing with old cars? "Nate?" he asked, loud enough for the whole family to hear. My dad chuckled, my mom sipped her wine a little too quickly, and I just smiled through clenched teeth. "Yeah," I said, meeting his gaze, "still playing with old cars, still getting paid for it too." He laughed, clearly, enjoying his little jab. "Well, if you ever want to do something real, maybe I can get you a gig at my company. We're always looking for guys who can get their hands dirty." I just nodded, letting the comment slide, but it stuck. I went back to my shop that night, the clank of metal and the hum of power tools, the only things keeping my anger in check. I had a team of skilled builders, a growing client list, and a reputation for creating some of the best custom off-road rigs in the region. But to my family, it was all just a messy distraction from a real career. Fast forward a few years, and my shop, Iron Forge Customs, is a serious business. We're building custom vehicles for everything from desert racing to tactical military use. I'm pulling in contracts worth hundreds of thousands, but my parents still act like I'm the black sheep tinkering in a backyard shed. They're too busy bragging about Jason's corner office and his new condo to notice my shop now sprawls across a full city block. Then last year, things really changed. One of my clients, a tech billionaire with a penchant for overlanding, introduced me to a group of investors looking for rugged, high-performance expedition vehicles. Long story short, I ended up signing a multi-million-dollar deal to supply their custom rigs for extreme environments. It was a massive break for my company, the kind of deal that takes you from local success to industry name, but my family's still oblivious. The real kicker came a few months ago at our cousin's wedding. Jason, dressed to the nines, started holding court about his company's latest product line. I tuned him out until he started bragging about their new adventure package, a rugged, overland-style truck upgrade that was apparently flying off the lot. He went on about how his marketing team had nailed the outdoor enthusiast demographic, practically making these trucks the go-to choice for off-road adventurers. That's when it hit me. The specs he was rattling off. The design elements. They were mine. I'd developed the core components for that very package under a white label deal with one of his company's suppliers. My brother was out here bragging about a product line that wouldn't exist without my work, and he had no clue. He didn't even know his company had become one of my biggest clients. And that's when the spark ignited. If they wanted to keep treating me like a garage rat, fine, I'd just let them learn the hard way. What happens when you underestimate the guy in the corner with grease under his nails? I went home that night, cracked open a cold one, and started sketching plans for a little side project, something that would change the game, push my company to the next level, and, if things lined up right, take a little wind out of Jason's perfectly tailored sails. I didn't plan to ruin my brother's career that night, but I'll admit the thought crossed my mind. And I guess that's where my real revenge story began. After that wedding, I couldn't get the idea out of my head. Jason's smug grin, his perfect suit, the way my parents hung on his every word. It all replayed in my mind like a broken record. He had no idea he was riding on the back of my hard work, and that ate at me. But I'm not the type to confront someone in the moment. I don't throw drinks in faces or cause scenes. I prefer the slow burn, the kind of payback that simmers until it's boiling over. Back at the shop, I leaned into my work harder than ever. I'd started Iron Forge Customs with a vision. And now that vision included proving my family, and especially my brother, wrong. I poured every spare moment into new designs, pushing my team to innovate even further. We were already known for our over-the-top builds, but I wanted to take it up a notch. If Jason's company was going to sell my designs without even knowing it, I'd make damn sure my fingerprints were all over their most profitable product line. A few weeks later, I got a call from one of my investors, a guy named Mike who loved off-roading as much as he loved throwing cash at promising businesses. He had connections in the military and had been pushing me to consider expanding into government contracts. The idea had always seemed a little too corporate for my taste, but now it felt like the perfect next step I wanted to make. Iron Forge more than just a custom shop. I wanted to build a legacy. I started sketching ideas for a new line of tactical off-road vehicles, something that could handle the harshest conditions imaginable. Bulletproof glass, reinforced frames, high-torque electric motors with backup diesel engines. The works. If I was going to one-up my brother's company, I needed something they couldn't just slap a badge on and claim as their own. Around this time, I also started digging deeper into the contracts my shop had with Jason's company. I had our lawyers review every clause, every line of fine print. It turned out that our white label deal wasn't as airtight as his executives probably thought. I had a lot more freedom to publicize our work than they realized. They just never expected the scrappy garage owner to have a lawyer sharp enough to spot the loopholes. I launched a low-key marketing campaign leaning into Iron Forge's rugged, rebellious image. We posted videos of our vehicles tackling impossible terrain, blasting through mud pits, and scaling boulder fields like they were mere speed bumps. My team shot footage of our custom rigs making their way through the harshest environments, all with our logo prominently displayed. I wanted to make it clear who was really behind those so-called adventure packages my brother's company was so proud of, and it worked. Orders started flooding in, not just from weekend warriors, but from serious expedition teams and government agencies. I landed a deal with a private security firm that needed rapid response vehicles for high-risk areas. Then a military division reached out asking if we could develop a line of all-terrain vehicles for border patrol and special ops missions. I took every meeting, shook every hand, and signed every contract with a grin, knowing that each one was another crack in my brother's perfect corporate facade. The real turning point came when I landed a $12 million deal to design a fleet of tactical vehicles for a South American mining company. They needed something tough enough to handle jungle trails, river crossings, and potentially hostile encounters. It was the kind of contract that takes a business from regional player to international contender. As the ink dried on that contract, I realized I'd crossed a line. I wasn't just trying to prove myself to my family anymore. I was building something they couldn't ignore. A business so undeniable that even my brother would have to swallow his pride and admit I'd outdone him. And the best part, he still had no idea. Business was booming. Iron Forge had gone from a scrappy garage to a full-blown manufacturing powerhouse, and I was finally starting to feel like all those sleepless nights were paying off. But the best part, Jason still had no idea his company's hottest-selling package was built on my designs. About a month after I signed that South American contract, I got a call from an old friend, Rick. We'd gone to trade school together before I struck out on my own. Rick was a solid guy, the kind who could rebuild a diesel engine blindfolded, and he'd ended up working as a field engineer for one of Jason's biggest clients. "Hey, man," Rick said, his voice crackling over the line. "You got a minute? I just saw something you need to know about." I wiped the grease off my hands and leaned against my workbench. "What's up?" "I was out on a test track yesterday," he said, "and guess what? I saw rolling off the line an entire fleet of trucks with your modular suspension system, the one you developed for the Talon build." I felt my jaw tighten. My hands curled into fists, smudging grease into my palms. That was my design, my hours of work, my sleepless nights. "Did they mention where the parts came from?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Nah," Rick said, a hint of annoyance in his voice. "They slapped their own branding on it, made it look like it was all in-house. But I recognized your work, man. I'd know those welds anywhere." I forced a laugh, though my teeth were grinding together. "Thanks for the heads up, Rick. I owe you a beer?" After I hung up, I took a deep breath and walked out into the main bay of my shop. My team was elbow deep in a custom build, a massive armored SUV for a private security firm. I watched them for a moment, the clang of metal and the hiss of welding torches filling the space. These guys trusted me. They believed in what we were building, and I wasn't about to let some corporate suits steal our work without a fight. I called my lawyer that afternoon, a no-nonsense woman named Marissa, who'd been with me since the early days of Iron Forge. I laid out the situation, and she listened carefully, the clatter of her keyboard echoing through the phone line. "All right," she said when I finished. "We've got some options here. We can hit them with a cease and desist, or we can go nuclear and demand compensation for unauthorized use of proprietary designs." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the framed photo of my first build, a beat-up old Jeep I'd restored in my parents' driveway when I was 16. I knew Jason's company had deep pockets, but I also knew they wouldn't want this kind of bad press. "No," I said, a slow grin spreading across my face. "Let's not show our cards just yet. I want to bleed them a little first. Let's make them sweat." Marissa chuckled, clearly enjoying my approach. "All right, boss. I'll start drafting some paperwork, but if you're planning to play the long game, you'd better have a damn good end game in mind." "Oh, I do," I said, my mind already spinning with ideas, "trust me." For the next few weeks, I threw everything I had into building the next evolution of our off-road line. I pored over blueprints late into the night, redesigning key components to be even tougher, lighter, and more adaptable. If Jason's company wanted to play dirty, I'd show them just how sharp my teeth could be. At the same time, I quietly started talking to a few of his company's biggest clients, the ones who bought their adventure packages in bulk. I sent them samples, gave them private demos, and let them see just how much more my builds could handle. I didn't pitch it as a direct replacement, just a superior alternative, but the message was clear. One by one, the orders started rolling in. Companies that had once been loyal to Jason's firm began switching to Iron Forge, lured by our superior quality and custom touches. My brother's company might have had the marketing muscle, but I had the grit and the tech to back it up. By the time the first whispers of supply chain problems started reaching me, I knew the trap was already closing. Jason's company had built its latest line around my designs, and now they were stuck. They couldn't just switch suppliers without a massive redesign, and they couldn't keep using my parts without facing a potential lawsuit. I leaned back in my office chair one evening, the glow of my computer screen reflecting off the scattered tools on my desk. I took a long pull from my beer, feeling the burn as it went down, and smiled. The cracks were forming, and I was just getting started. The first real sign that I'd rattled the cage came in the form of a glossy, overproduced email. It popped into my inbox one morning, the subject line screaming in all caps, "Exciting partnership opportunity." I almost deleted it, assuming it was just another spammy cold pitch, but then I saw the sender's name, a senior VP from my brother's company. I cracked my knuckles, leaned back in my chair, and clicked it open. The message was full of corporate fluff, all about synergizing strengths and exploring strategic collaborations. But buried in the second paragraph was the real meat. They wanted to lock me into an exclusive supply agreement for my modular suspension systems and tactical frames, the very components they'd been selling under their own brand without my permission. I leaned forward, grinning like a wolf that had just caught the scent of fresh prey. This wasn't just a desperate attempt to secure their supply chain. It was a white flag, a quiet admission that they were starting to feel the squeeze. I fired off a quick response, pretending to be interested, and set up a meeting for the following week. Then I called Marissa. "They're coming to you," she said, her voice crackling through the speaker. I could practically hear her leaning back in her leather office chair, already spinning the angles in her mind. "That's interesting, right?" I said, leaning back with a grin. "I'm thinking we let them sweat a bit, make them think they've got the upper hand." "Dangerous game, Nate," she said, but I could hear the excitement in her voice. "All right, I'll draft some talking points, but be careful, these guys don't play fair." The day of the meeting, I walked into their glass-walled conference room wearing my usual oil-stained jeans, steel-toed boots, and a black iron-forged tee with my company's logo stretched across the back. I knew I looked like I'd just rolled out from under a truck, and I did it on purpose. I wanted them to underestimate me, to see the grease and the dirt and miss the sharp mind behind it. The VP who greeted me was a slick, polished guy in his late 40s, every hair in place, his handshake firm but cold. He introduced himself as Mark, then led me into a room filled with suits and ties, their faces set in polite corporate smiles. I felt like a wolf strolling into a henhouse. We sat, and Mark launched into a carefully rehearsed pitch about mutual growth and leveraging industry expertise. I let him drone on for a good 10 minutes before I leaned forward, cutting him off mid-sentence. "Let me save you some breath, Mark," I said, leaning my elbows on the polished mahogany table. "You're not here because you want to explore opportunities. You're here because you've built your latest product line on my designs, and now you're in a corner." The room went dead silent. I watched as a few of the younger execs shifted in their seats, eyes darting nervously to their boss. Mark's smile froze, his jaw tightening just enough for me to notice. "I'm not here to sell you parts," I continued, locking eyes with him. "I'm here to make a deal, one that benefits me, and only me." Mark's face slowly relaxed, and for the first time I saw a hint of respect in his eyes. He leaned back, steepling his fingers like a villain in a bad action movie. "All right, Nate," he said, his voice dropping a few degrees. "What exactly do you want?" I laid it out for him. No more white label deals. No more hiding my brand behind theirs. If they wanted iron forge tech, they'd pay a premium, and they'd plaster my logo on every single truck that left their assembly line. I wanted my team to have full creative control over the design process, and I wanted a cut of every vehicle they sold with my parts. Mark leaned back, tapping his fingers on the table as he considered my terms. "That's a steep ask," he said finally, a hint of challenge in his tone. I just smiled. "You don't have a choice, Mark. You've already built your brand around my designs. Without me, you're dead in the water." Silence stretched across the room. I let it hang, counting each tick of the wall clock, watching the executives exchange glances, their polished exteriors cracking just a bit. Finally, Mark let out a slow breath and leaned forward. "All right," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "We'll consider your terms, but I want exclusivity. If we do this, you don't sell to our competitors." I leaned back, pretending to think it over. Of course, I had no intention of agreeing to that, but I wanted them to think they had a shot. "Put it in writing," I said, standing up and offering my hand. "Then we'll talk." Mark hesitated for just a second before clasping my hand, his grip firm, but just a little too quick to let go. I walked out of that boardroom with a grin on my face, already planning my next move. They thought they could box me and control me, own my work, but they had no idea the storm I was about to unleash. As I stepped into the sunlight outside their glass fortress, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Marissa. "You alive?" I chuckled, typing back a quick response. "More than ever." After that meeting, I knew the countdown had started. I'd just thrown a lit match into the dry kindling of their carefully curated corporate image, and it was only a matter of time before the whole thing went up in flames. But I didn't want to just watch it burn. I wanted to control the fire, guide it, make sure it consumed everything they'd taken from me and more. I spent the next few weeks tightening my grip on the off-road market. I poured every spare dollar into R&D, expanding my team, and upgrading our production lines. I even brought in a few retired military engineers to help refine our tactical designs. If my brother's company thought they could muscle me into an exclusive deal, they were about to learn just how dangerous it is to corner a guy who spent his entire career fighting for every inch. As the weeks ticked by, I started getting more and more calls from nervous suppliers, the same ones Jason's company had strong-armed into working with them exclusively. It seemed word was spreading that Iron Forge was no longer just a scrappy custom shop. We were becoming a serious contender, and that made a lot of people nervous. But the real fun started when I got a call from one of Jason's top salespeople, a woman named Claire who'd jumped ship to a rival firm after a messy office scandal. She'd always been sharp, a bit ruthless even, and I figured if anyone knew where the bodies were buried, it was her. We met at a noisy, dimly lit bar downtown, the kind of place where people went to hide their secrets in the clink of glasses and the haze of cigarette smoke. Claire showed up in a sharp blazer, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. So she said, sliding into the booth across from me, "I hear you've been making waves." I just grinned, leaning back as the waitress set a whiskey in front of me. You could say that. Claire leaned in, her eyes narrowing. "You want to know what your brother's company has been doing behind the scenes? Because trust me, it's worse than you think." I took a slow sip of my drink, letting the burn fuel my growing anticipation. I'm listening. Over the next hour, Claire laid it all out. She told me how Jason's company had been cutting corners for years, using substandard parts to pad their profit margins, then slapping premium price tags on the finished products. They'd even been skimping on safety features, the kind of shortcuts that could get people killed if their trucks ever had to handle real off-road conditions. But the real kicker, they'd been using my designs, my reinforced frames, my patented suspension systems, as the foundation for their entire adventure line, and they'd been lying about it to their investors, claiming it was all their own engineering. I felt my blood run cold. This wasn't just about bruised egos or stolen credit anymore. This was fraud, plain and simple, and potentially criminal. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, leaning in as the noise of the bar faded into the background. Claire's eyes gleamed, a predator's smile stretching her lips. "Because I hate your brother," she said simply. "And because if you play this right, you could bury him." I left the bar that night with my mind racing, my fists clenching and unclenching as I paced the cracked pavement outside. I'd come into this wanting payback, wanting to prove a point. But now I had a chance to do something more. To expose Jason's entire empire for the house of cards it really was. I called Marissa the next morning, laying out everything Claire had told me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, the sound of rustling papers and quick keystrokes filtering through the speaker. "This is big, Nate," she said finally, her voice tinged with something I hadn't heard before, a hint of genuine concern. "If you go after them for this, it's not just a lawsuit, it's a full-scale takedown. Are you sure you're ready for that?" I thought about it for a long moment, the memory of Jason's smug grin flickering behind my eyes, the sound of my parents' dismissive voices echoing in my head. "Yeah," I said finally, my voice hard as the steel we bent in my shop every day. "I'm ready." Over the next few weeks, Marissa and her team dug into the financials, pulling every thread, unraveling every hidden contract and off-the-books deal they could find. I brought in a few more allies, old friends from my early days, engineers and fabricators who knew the industry inside and out. Together, we started piecing together the full picture, building a case that would blow the lid off my brother's carefully curated image. And then just as I was starting to wonder if I'd overplayed my hand, the breakthrough came. Marissa called me late one night, her voice buzzing with excitement. "We got them," she said, practically vibrating through the phone. Internal memos, emails, even signed documents from Jason himself, all proving they knew they were stealing your designs and selling them as their own. I closed my eyes, letting out a slow, controlled breath. This was it, the smoking gun I'd been waiting for. What's the next step? I asked, already feeling the adrenaline building, my pulse pounding in my ears. Marissa's voice sharpened. All business now. We go public, press releases, lawsuits, the whole 9 yards. We're going to blow this thing wide open. I hung up, leaning back in my chair, the cool metal creaking under my weight. I felt a slow, predatory grin stretch across my face. The storm was coming. And this time I was going to make sure my brother felt every drop of the fallout. With the evidence in hand, we went on the offensive. Marissa's legal team fired off a barrage of cease and desist letters, followed by a full-blown lawsuit for intellectual property theft, fraud, and breach of contract. It was a brutal precision strike, designed to hit every weak point in Jason's company's armor. The morning after we filed, I woke up to a phone buzzing like a chainsaw on my nightstand. Texts, emails, missed calls, all from numbers I barely recognized. I scrolled through them, my eyes catching familiar names. Old classmates, former clients, even a couple of my parents' friends, all suddenly very interested in how my little garage business had turned into a headline-making powerhouse. But the one call I was waiting for, the one I'd been hoping for in a twisted way, didn't come. Jason. It wasn't until 3 days later that he finally cracked. I was in my shop welding a custom roll cage onto an expedition rig when my phone rang, the screen flashing his name. I let it buzz twice, savoring the moment before I yanked off my gloves and answered. "Yeah," I said, leaning back against the cool metal frame. "What the hell?" Nate, Jason's voice crackled through the speaker, raw and frantic. "What the actual hell are you doing?" I chuckled, flipping up my welding visor. "You mean besides defending my intellectual property and my company's future? Not much." "You're destroying my career." He spat, his voice a harsh whisper, like he was trying to keep his meltdown private. "Do you even know what you've done? You've put hundreds of people's jobs at risk. Do you even care?" I paused, letting the silence stretch until I could practically hear him vibrating with rage. "Did you care when you slapped your company's logo on my designs without asking? Did you care when you used my work to pad your profit margins while calling me a glorified mechanic at family dinners?" He sputtered, caught off guard. That's different. This is business. Nate, you don't get it." I let out a slow breath, my pulse steady. I felt calmer than I had in years. The old bitterness draining away, replaced by something sharper, cleaner. "No, Jason," I said, my voice cutting through his desperate rambling. "You don't get it. I built this, every bolt, every weld, every late night in the shop, every risk I took to make this company what it is. That was all me. And you thought you could just slap a sticker on it and call it yours? Not a chance." There was a long, crackling pause, the sound of his shallow breathing filling the line. "What do you want, Nate?" he whispered. His tone broken, all the arrogance drained from his voice. I leaned back, letting the steel frame cool against my back, the smell of scorched metal filling my lungs. "I want you to watch it all fall apart, Jason. I want you to see what happens when you steal from the wrong guy." I hung up before he could respond, tossing my phone onto the workbench and pulling my gloves back on. I felt the weight of the moment settle over me like the heavy steel frames we welded together in the shop. Solid, undeniable, unbreakable. The next few weeks were a blur of headlines and boardroom battles. Jason's company tried to countersue, of course, but we had the receipts. The emails, the financial records, the patent filings, all neatly laid out like the pieces of a perfectly tuned engine. Industry blogs picked up the story, followed by mainstream business news. Investors started pulling out their confidence, shattered by the revelations of fraud and corner cutting. Stock prices plummeted, wiping millions off the company's valuation in a matter of days. And then came the real gut punch. The federal investigation. Marissa's team had been quietly feeding evidence to the SEC and the Department of Justice, and when the subpoenas started rolling in, it was game over. I watched it all unfold from my office, the screens on my wall flashing with live stock tickers and news alerts. My team moved around me, welding sparks and grinding metal, filling the air as they cranked out orders for clients who suddenly couldn't get enough of our custom builds. But the real victory came one rainy Wednesday morning, about a month into the chaos. I was elbow deep in the guts of a V8 engine when my phone buzzed. I pulled off my gloves, wiping the oil on my jeans before picking up. Nate. It was my dad, his voice cracking, a hint of the old fire gone, replaced by something smaller, frailer. Can we talk? I leaned against the workbench, feeling the cool concrete floor through the soles of my boots. Sure, Dad. What's up? He hesitated, the silence stretching the sound of my guys hammering metal in the background like a heartbeat. It's about your brother, he said finally, his voice heavy. He's not doing well. Everything's falling apart, Nate. The business, his reputation, even the family. Your mom's a wreck. I closed my eyes, the weight of the moment settling over me. I thought about Jason. The smug grin, the casual insults, the way he'd brushed off my work as a silly hobby. And I thought about the years I'd spent in his shadow, building something real while he played corporate dress-up. I'm sorry, Dad, I said finally. My voice steady, my heart calm, but he made his bed. Now he has to lie in it. There was a long, ragged sigh on the other end of the line, the sound of a man realizing he'd lost control of the story he'd been telling himself for decades. I didn't know he whispered, his voice breaking. I didn't know what you'd built. I smiled, leaning back as the roar of an engine echoed through the shop. That's the thing, Dad. You never asked. I hung up, sliding my phone back into my pocket. I took a deep breath, the smell of oil and steel filling my lungs, the thrum of the shop vibrating in my bones. I turned back to the V8 on the workbench, slipping my gloves back on the roar of my team's work echoing around me. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Story 2. My sibling knocked. My mother and wife assisted them in concealing it. They want me to raise the child and cover my brother's legal expenses 6 months later. Hi everyone. Prior to starting today's video, I need your assistance. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe. Since we've observed the channel is losing some of its popularity, it's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. The video subreddit will now begin. I never imagined that I'd be blogging here, but I need to vent. The 3 individuals who were meant to support me really caught me off guard. My own mother, my brother, and my wife. This is how it all transpired. For the past 5 years, I, a 28-year-old man, have been employed as a software developer, worked my way up to senior developer at a tiny software startup. We create CRM platforms, payment systems, and corporate solutions, that sort of thing. Although it wasn't the most glamorous job in the world, I was able to purchase a respectable 2-bedroom home in a desirable area 2 years ago because to the money I made from it. Purchased it prior to marriage. Even if my firm isn't as well known as Google or Apple, we are nonetheless strong. $90K basic salary with yearly incentives that often total between $15 and $20K perks for health that truly cover stuff. A 401k match is the type of steadiness that most men my age still long for. When I initially started, my 42-year-old supervisor, Chester, took me under his wing. He is an old-school programmer who went into management yet continues to work with programming. He taught me more than simply recommended practices for coding. He taught me how to negotiate my pay and handle workplace politics, helped me manage customer expectations without making unrealistic promises, and it earned me an additional $12,000 on my most recent promotion. Then 3 years ago, at a friend's home party, my wife, now ex-wife Megan, a 26-year-old woman, entered my life. She was a stunning, blonde nurse with a pediatric specialty who worked at the nearby hospital. Everyone could see the spark between us right away. One of those relationships where you feel like you've been friends for years. My attention was initially drawn to the way she lighted up while discussing her work. Not only superficial information, but the technical facets of pediatric treatment. Even for a techie like myself, she was able to make sense of complicated medical processes, astute, committed, and passionate about her work. It was just what I wanted. Before I proposed, we dated for a year. We had a little wedding at her parents' church after she sobbed and said, yes, only about 50 individuals, close relatives, and friends. The 2-to-1 carat diamond ring with a platinum band cost me 2 months' pay. To put things in perspective, my 24-year-old younger brother Ed has always been the star of the show, despite being 4 years younger. More attractive, more sociable, and more adept at swaying our mother to grant him his wishes. In high school, he was a varsity baseball player. I was the youngster from the chess club who spent my leisure time creating websites. A classic case of mama's boy. I was the responsible, quiet one who put in a lot of effort but was never quite up to mom's standards. Ed was unquestionably mom's favorite, but dad was always fair to us both. That relationship remained constant. At family get-togethers, the difference between us was almost laughable. Ed was 2 hours late for Thanksgiving 3 years ago, with a female he met the previous evening but without the side dish. He had promised I had been there since the morning helping to prepare the turkey. And instead of being irritated, Mom worried over both of them. When Mom wasn't looking, Dad just poured me an additional glass of water and shook his head. Dad is a mechanical engineer by profession, methodical and logical. It follows the rules. I learned how to change the oil in my first automobile from him, how to repair a dripping faucet. All that crap about the practical dad. He admired my coding work, even if he never understood it. I had landed a good job. Mom quit early from her job as an elementary school teacher when Dad's engineering company took off. Had a special place in her heart for Ed, whom she referred to as her creative, sensitive soul. I immediately started coding after graduation, whereas Ed worked at a variety of occupations. After a few months of employment, he would become bored and leave, had a tale about toxic management all the time. In the meantime, his credit card debts somehow ended up being an issue for his parents. Twice, I bailed him out of 2 small legal issues, one with trespassing at an ex-girlfriend's place, and another involving driving with an expired license. Cost me around $3,000, which he said he would reimburse as soon as circumstances improved. In the end, I assisted him in landing a sales position with my business. My supervisor, Chester, was apprehensive. The previous year, he had met Ed at our company's Christmas party and had not been pleased. However, I endorsed him. I promised to keep him in line. I thought Ed would have some stability there, and he had the charm for it. Besides, family protects family, right? Our company offered a base salary of $65,000 plus commission for the sales position. Not bad, considering Ed's patchy record. I coached him on our products for 3 weekends. According to industry jargon, this was his opportunity to create something tangible. He said all the right things and appeared appreciative. I got one of those from Chester. You must be aware of what you're doing. When I introduce them, they look. Megan and I had a fairly smooth transition to married life. Although it wasn't suitable for a Hollywood film, our relationship was strong. We discussed forming a family. In a year or 2, perhaps I worked on the house on the weekends, building a deck in the backyard and installing a new kitchen island. All that stuff for homeowners. The place looked like it was from one of those home design magazines, thanks to Megan's decorations. In that first year, I invested roughly $20,000 in home improvements. The master bathroom was updated with heated floors and a rainfall shower, and the living room was given new hardwood flooring. The backyard was landscaped. Every dollar I invested increased the property's value and provided us with a place we both cherished. It was a good first year. On Sunday morning, we had our usual pancakes, date nights on Wednesdays, sporadic weekend visits to her parents' lake home. We took a cooking class together and threw game nights for our friends. Couples activities are what you're expected to do. We appeared content. After a year or so, I was given a significant project at work that involved rebuilding a large hospital chain's payment system. The irony isn't lost on me now. I was working longer hours, often coming home after Megan was asleep. Weekend work became normal. The project was supposed to last 3 months, but stretched to 6. I started missing those Sunday pancakes, those Wednesday date nights. The project was a career maker. Successfully implementing a new payment system for a $2 billion company would put me on the fast track for a senior architect position. Bigger salary, stock options, more control over which projects I worked on. I explained all this to Megan, and she seemed to understand. She even brought me dinner at the office a few times during those first weeks of overtime. During this time, Megan made a new friend at work. Alexis, this travel nurse from Seattle who was doing a 6-month rotation at our hospital. Alexis was everything Megan wasn't: single, carefree, kind of wild. Suddenly, Megan was going out for girls' nights with Alexis and coming home with stories about clubs I didn't know existed in our city. I was too busy with my project to really notice how much things were changing. Things started feeling weird about 4 months before things imploded, right around when my big project was wrapping up. The system was finally launched, and I was looking forward to getting back to normal life with Megan. But somewhere along the way, normal had shifted. Megan's schedule got unpredictable. She'd always been consistent with her hospital shifts, 3 12-hour days, then 4 days off. But suddenly, she was picking up extra shifts and going out with coworkers more often. When I asked, she'd say the hospital was short-staffed or that her friend Amber was going through a breakup and needed support. I checked our bank statements one night and noticed Megan had been withdrawing $200 to $300 in cash every week for the past 2 months. When I asked about it casually, she said something vague about preferring cash for small purchases. And girls' nights out made sense on the surface, but it was new behavior. I tried to reconnect. Suggested we take a weekend trip to celebrate my project being done. She said she couldn't get the time off. I offered to cook her favorite dinner. She texted last minute saying Alexis needed her help with something. A rational person might have connected these dots sooner, but I was still operating on trust. 6 years of building enterprise systems had trained me to look for multiple data points before declaring a bug. I needed more evidence. Then there was the phone stuff. She'd be texting constantly with this little smile on her face, but the second I walked in the room, phone flipped over. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd say, just Amber or work group chat. After I got Ed the sales job at my company, he started coming to office. Happy hours more. Megan would show up too, saying she wanted to support both of us. There was this one night at Bali's where I got stuck talking to a client who showed up unexpectedly. I was across the room for maybe 45 minutes. When I finally broke free, I found Megan and Ed in this deep conversation in a corner booth, heads almost touching. They jumped a little when I walked up. Ed immediately launched into the story about a potential lead at the hospital where Megan worked, how they were discussing an in with the procurement department. Made sense on the surface. What didn't make sense was how Ed's hand lingered on Megan's arm a bit too long, or how Megan's cheeks were flushed in that way. I recognized from our early dating days, but again, my own brother, my own wife, I filed it away as an anomaly, not a pattern. Ed started showing up at our place unannounced. He'd bring Megan these little gifts, her favorite coffee from that specialty shop downtown, fancy chocolates or candles she enjoyed. When I complimented him for being thoughtful, he'd say stuff like simply watching out for my sister-in-law. I truly thought it was lovely at the time, freaking ignorant at work. Ed was actually doing well in sales. Hit 115% of his quota 3 months in a row, started dressed better, seemed more focused. I was secretly happy that my aiding him had paid off. Coworkers would applaud me on clearing stuff out, and I'd get this misguided feeling of brotherly success. Then around 2 months after Megan started becoming sick in the mornings, I'd hear her in the bathroom at 6 a.m., the shower running to conceal the sounds. One morning, I woke up to check on her holding her hair back as she spewed up. I mentioned maybe she was pregnant and she freaked out, like truly panicked. Said that the hospital was experiencing a gastrointestinal ailment. She made a doctor's appointment right away, but she didn't want me to accompany her, that there was no need for concern. I had been using my calendar to keep track of her cycle. After all, we were purportedly trying for a child. This was the first time she had ever been late by 2 weeks. However, I didn't ask her directly. I assumed she would let me know when she was prepared. Perhaps she was hesitant to share the news until she was certain. Around this time, I went out for drinks with my buddy Kevin, who works in hospital administration, not at Megan's hospital. I told him about Megan's enigmatic stomach ailment when he inquired about how things were doing. Morning sickness, dude. He winked as he spoke. He had this strange expression on his face when I told him Megan denied it. Are you two still attempting? I said yes. He simply nodded and shifted the conversation. He texted me later that evening. I don't mean to start a fight, but how is Ed doing at your business? I responded that he was meeting his sales goals and performing well. Kevin never gave a reason for his question. At this point, Mom also began to behave strangely. When I was around, she would contact Megan directly rather than our house phone as normal. Megan would say things like, "Yes, I got that recipe," or "I'll check that sale," during these calls. However, it felt like the talks went on longer than necessary. Mom exclaimed, "Oh, Josh is home," as soon as I entered the room while they were on speaker. Later, we will discuss. Megan had always been liked by Mom, but they suddenly became close. They would go shopping with each other and share inside jokes that I was not aware of. Even a family heirloom jewelry that had been pledged to my future wife since I was a child was given to Megan by Mom. Mom responded, "Well, she's your wife now, isn't she?" When I expressed my amazement at this. Her tone seemed strange for some reason. One Thursday in April, everything went apart. Megan had a shift at the hospital, so I worked from home. When she arrived home, I had planned to surprise her with her favorite takeaway for supper. After feeling separated for weeks, I'm hoping to get back in touch. I received an email notification at lunchtime informing me that the furniture delivery I had been anticipating was set for tomorrow. I was unable to locate the initial confirmation in my email to respond to, so I had to confirm the time slot. In our home office, Megan and I shared a desktop computer, which I used for personal projects, and Megan for her nursing and continuing education. I was signed into my email. But I recalled that Megan occasionally arranged my emails on the computer. While I let emails to accumulate, she was a huge fan of Inbox Zero. I checked Megan's email to see whether she had sent it to a folder after thinking that perhaps she had seen it. The subject line of an email exchange between her and my mother caught my attention. At that point, "Keep Josh in the dark." I felt sick to my stomach. For what seemed like an eternity, I sat there looking at that subject line. I had a voice in my brain telling me to shut down the browser and respect her privacy. But there was also a stronger voice asking me, "What the hell is this about?" It felt like I was getting repeatedly smacked in the face when I began reading the thread handshaking. My mom and Megan exchanged emails 3 months ago on how to conceal Megan's romance with Ed. The initial communications were ambiguous. Mom asked Megan whether she was certain about this course of action and cautioned her to use greater caution around Josh. But they soon got to the point. In reality, Mom was giving her guidance on how to hide it, when to report for hospital shifts, what justifications to make, and even how to meet at her house when Dad was away playing golf. "You have at least 4 hours because Frank always plays 18 holes on Thursdays." I read one email to help Megan and Ed scheme behind my back. Mom had made a comprehensive itinerary of when Dad would be out of the home. The bomb came next. The pregnancy was the subject of the most recent correspondence. They weren't sure if it was Ed's or mine, but Megan's doctor verified that she was 2 months pregnant. We were in the same time frame. After I indicated that the morning sickness may be pregnancy. Megan sent me a panicked email. My wife was being told to pass it off as mine by my own mother. In any case, Josh wouldn't be harmed by what he doesn't know, and he would be a better father nevertheless. It was like reading a conspiracy thriller during the entire chat. They had backup plans, timestamp specific alibis, and even a shared calendar where they kept track of my work schedule and scheduled our meetings appropriately. What irritated me was how methodical everything was. This was more than a careless error. The 3 individuals who were meant to love me the most were involved in a planned, ongoing lie. I was physically ill. I must have spent hours reading these emails while seated at the computer. It was more terrible than the last one I was looking for. Something. Anything that would explain that this was all a sick joke, a mistake, or something else entirely. No, it was brutally obvious. I saved all of the screenshots I captured on a flash drive. I then placed the most damning ones in a folder after printing them out. I gave Chester a call. I was unable to think clearly. Someone level-headed was needed. A lawyer is necessary. "Don't confront them just yet," he urged Chester. Had a good lawyer. It had been a difficult second divorce for him. I was in my living room when he made the call. Put it on speaker. Sarah Jacobson, divorce attorney. Since we lived in a fault state and I had concrete evidence of adultery, Sarah thought I was in a strong position. The fact that I had bought the house before marriage meant it wouldn't be considered marital property. Same with most of my assets and money. She encouraged me to safeguard my funds quickly, so Chester drove me to the bank. I moved most of our joint funds into a separate account, leaving enough in the joint account to avoid claims of financial abandonment. I left exactly $5,000 in our joint account, enough to show I wasn't trying to financially strand her, but not enough to fund a new life with my brother. The rest, about $38,000, went into an individual account under just my name. I also called my investment firm and verified that my premarital assets, about $115,000 in various funds, were properly documented as separate property. By the time Megan arrived home that night, I had already set things in action. Sarah was drafting divorce papers. Chester had helped me regain some composure. I didn't confront Megan that night. I was still in shock, and I needed to think carefully. "How was your shift?" I asked, my voice remarkably steady. "Exhausting," she remarked, outlining some imaginary emergency department situation. I watched her lie to my face, thinking of the emails where she reported seeing Ed at my mother's place that exact day. The toughest part was pretending everything was normal when my entire life was exploding. She inquired why Chester's vehicle had been in our driveway earlier. Apparently, the neighbors had mentioned it. I stated we'd been considering a work project, another falsehood to add to the pile over the following several days. I behaved normal while setting things in action. I'd go to work, make small chat with Megan in the evenings, even watched our normal Thursday night program together. All while dying within. I grabbed all my crucial documents and placed them to a safety deposit box. I froze our shared credit cards. I even put mini cameras in our communal spaces, totally legal as it was. My house, Chester helped me set them up while Megan was at work, just in case they try to remove or damage anything he suggested. Kevin from hospital administration texted to check in. Turns out he'd seen Megan and Ed together at a restaurant weeks earlier, appearing more intimate than in-laws should. He'd been trying to find a way to inform me. I thanked him for trying, told him I found it out on my own. My strategy started formulating on Sunday night. Megan was in the shower when a text notice flashed up on her iPad on the coffee table from Ed, stating he couldn't wait to see her tomorrow at Mom's. The treachery was happening virtually every day directly under my nose. That's when I settled on the supper plan. I contacted my dad Monday morning and asked if he might have a family dinner at our house that weekend. I told him I had some excellent news to give. "Are you sure you want to host your mom and I can accomplish it?" He extended an offer. "No, I insist." "At our house, please," I said, as I considered how ideal it would be to face them all on my land. I instructed Megan to get ready for a nice supper and invited Ed to join my parents. Despite her nervousness, she consented. When I told her Ed was coming, I could feel the stress in her shoulders. That day, she texted nonstop, most likely planning stories with his mother and him. I had 2 additional meetings with Sarah in the days before the dinner. She prepared drafts of the divorce petition. Sarah gave an update over the phone on Thursday. On Friday morning, the divorce documents would be prepared. The manila envelope was burning a hole in my bag all afternoon when I picked them up during my lunch break. I took the afternoon off work on the day of the dinner to get everything ready. Food was ordered from this charming downtown Italian restaurant I couldn't have been cooking. My dad received a bundle of emails in a bigger envelope and divorce papers in a manila envelope. The dining room's camera was recording in case things became unmanageable. Later, I wanted evidence. I was also prepared with another surprise. I got a cashier's check for $10,000 made out to my dad after cashing out some stock options. I was aware that Ed had lately received a loan from my parents to settle his credit card debt. I reasoned that before the family broke apart, Dad should receive his money back. At 6:30 p.m., my parents were the first to arrive. Mom inquired where Megan was right away after giving me this strange, tight embrace. "She's preparing herself upstairs." My voice was fairly steady as I spoke. Ed arrived last at 6:45. I wanted to smack him right away because of his arrogant smirk. As if we were still friends, he slapped my back and gave me one of those bro embraces. It took all of my self-control not to respond. I got Megan this blue outfit for our anniversary, and she walked downstairs wearing it. We all took a seat for supper. I maintained my composure while chit-chatting about work, the weather, and my father's golf game. Mom continued to look anxiously between Ed and Megan. Megan moved her food about her plate, hardly touching anything. Dad raised his glass after the main meal. So tell us about the happy news you wanted to share. Grinning, I took out the manila envelope from beneath the table. I do have anything to share, actually, I remarked, passing the envelope to Megan across the table. The documents are divorce paperwork. The room fell quiet. Megan's cheeks turned pale. What are you discussing? Without opening the envelope, she muttered, Megan, I am fully aware of you, Ed, and the baby. It may be his, about your mother, helping you conceal everything. Despite my inward rage, I maintained a steady tone of speech. Mom gave a sharp gasp. You have no right to accuse them of this. Megan would never do that. I took out the second envelope and gave it to my dad, interrupting her. Mom and Megan exchanged emails about the affair and how to keep it a secret from me. Lasted for a minimum of 3 months. Dad began to read, his hands shaking. He lost the color in his face. Ed abruptly knocked his chair over and sprang to his feet. It was not your place to read her correspondence, he yelled, as if it were the true offense committed here. I believe I had every reason to suspect my wife of being unfaithful to my brother, and perhaps carrying his child, I said, maintaining a level voice. Megan, how long were you going to keep that a secret? Did you simply pretend it was mine? Megan started crying. It isn't what you believe, she cried. I cherish you. It was an error. While my mother covered for you, I made a 3-month error with my brother. There was no comedy in my laughter. You're pregnant now, too. Dad was reading the papers when Mom reached for them, but he kept them out of her reach. What is this, Catherine? His voice was dangerously quiet as he asked, Did you assist them in concealing this from Josh? Fake shock had turned to terror on my mother's face. You assured me, Megan, that it was Josh's. Throwing Megan under the bus to rescue herself, she remarked abruptly. Looking up from the emails, Dad did so. He had a stone-hard face. Catherine, were you aware of this? Did you assist them in keeping this a secret from our son? Quiet yet very serious was his voice. In an attempt to play victim, Mom began to cry. All I wanted to do was keep the family safe. Ed was wrong, but it wouldn't assist anyone if the family was split apart. In fact, Ed, the arrogant jerk, sneered. It's not that big of a deal, please. I bonded with Megan. It occurs. In any case, Josh is always at work, seldom gives her any attention. Something broke inside of me. I got up, went around the table, and gave him a straight punch to the nose. A nice snap sounded, and blood began streaming down his face instantly. He knocked over a side table as he staggered back. Mom ran to Ed and yelled, Josh, what's wrong with you? Then Dad got up and he looked more irate than I had ever seen him. Catherine enough, our son recently discovered the worst kind of betrayal from his brother and wife. You're also concerned about Ed's nose. He gestured to Ed. Now leave this house. Ed glared at us all while holding his bleeding nose. It's not over yet. This is something you will regret before hurriedly leaving. Via the front door, he spit. Dad grabbed her arm as Mom attempted to follow him. You remain here. We need to talk about your part in all of this. At the table. Megan was still in tears. Please, Josh. This is something we can resolve. I'm so sorry I made a grave error. I felt nothing but icy disdain as I turned to face her. A paternity test is what I want. I need to know whether this baby is mine if you plan to keep it. In any case, we're finished. I gave my dad the cashier's check. This is to reimburse Ed for the recent loan. I reasoned that before anything goes wrong, you ought to get your money back. Dad gave the check a mournful glance before turning back to face me. "I didn't know any of this was going on, son." In a desperate attempt to defend herself, Mom said that she only wanted to keep Ed safe, and that while she knew it was wrong, she believed it would only be a phase and that she didn't want to hurt me. It didn't sit well with Dad. "Get your coat," he said. After my parents departed, they were departing. It seemed like hours passed while Megan and I sat in quiet. At last, she said something. "Now what? Right now. You now gather your belongings and depart. I own the house. It is not a part of the community. You have till tomorrow to decide your course of action. It won't be here, though." After giving a hesitant nod, she headed upstairs to pack. The ruins of what I believed to be my life were all around me as I sat at the dining table, having an oddly peaceful feeling I had made it through the worst that had transpired. From now on, everything will be rebuilt. The weeks that followed were a haze of paperwork and legal sessions. In order to stay with a buddy, Megan moved out, interestingly enough, not with Ed. The day following the supper, I had replaced the locks. As soon as it was safe to do so, the paternity test was planned. Megan nodded, without protest. I believe she had a secret wish that the child would be mine. I'm thinking that may make a difference. Ed had the audacity to call the police and report the punch. And 2 weeks after the meal, I was issued with a minor assault complaint. Sarah, my lawyer, wasn't too worried. First offense, emotional provocation, and lack of a weapon. Although it isn't a defense in and of itself, it could be important for punishment. She made it apparent that the attack would not be disregarded by the court. However, context could be on my side. Our hearing was 3 months later, playing the victim like an expert. Ed arrived with his arm around Mom. Sarah accompanied me, and Chester and 2 other character witnesses from my job attested to my track record of professionalism and self-control. The court heard testimony detailing the events that preceded the incident, assessed the occurrence, and accepted some background information about the affair, not as justification, but as background. The court ultimately convicted me, guilty of simple assault, and fined me $500, stating that the crime was a one-time reaction to a very personal betrayal. The judge wasn't holding anything when she said, "I let emotions get in the way of better judgment." But she also hinted that Ed was lucky that things hadn't become worse. Mom seemed ashamed. Ed scowled as if he anticipated a round of applause. I thought the $500 was well spent. The day the assault charges were filed, Dad gave me a call. He was enraged at Ed, not at me. He informed me that he had already started the process of completely removing Ed from his will. Mom reportedly had a total breakdown when she learned, vowing to leave Dad if he carried out the plan. She may leave, I informed her, but she should know that if she picked Ed above our family, I would make sure she received nothing. Dad said that to me. Get her to stop talking quickly? My dad's financial situation is serious. Smart investments 30 years at his engineering company, assets in real estate. It makes sense that when Dad threatened to cut Ed out, Mom freaked out. This whole event exposed Mom's true nature. Ed had been brought up to believe he was infallible by her, and now she had to deal with the fallout from producing such a conceited jerk. At least she would quit publicly defending Ed, according to Dad, who stated she was still wailing and moping about her family's disintegration. A week after the supper, Dad stopped by the house. He assisted me with repainting the living room and master bedroom by bringing his tools, removing any trace of Megan's interior design decisions. "You're managing this better than I would have at your age," he added, placing his hand on my shoulder after we completed working without any conversation. "You have my admiration." He had no idea how much that meant. After taking a week off, I returned to work. Chester had informed the staff that I needed space since I was juggling family matters. He had moved my desk to a different floor from Ed's section by the time I got back. "Well done." Chester also placed Ed on a performance improvement plan, citing ethical issues in his file. As I later learned, although it isn't illegal to sleep with your brother's wife, Chester managed to make Ed's job more difficult without going against the law. My dad felt entitled to know what his daughter had done, so he told Megan's devout parents everything. It devastated them. Her father apologized over the phone, stating they had brought her up better than this. They informed Megan that unless she returned to God, she would not be allowed in their house. I couldn't blame them for being dissatisfied, but it was very harsh. Eventually, Ed and Megan rented an apartment together, but they didn't seem very happy based on what I've heard. Their sole guest was Mom, who crept over when she assumed Dad wouldn't be looking. All three of them were removed from my life, banned. Their emails, changed my phone completely, and so forth. The only family member I still communicate with is my dad. The results of the paternity test were returned. It wasn't my baby. It was a relief, in a sense, a fresh start with no biological bonds to uphold. After then, the divorce process proceeded without incident. The paternity test confirmed that it wasn't my child, and the adultery was verified. Megan received very little since we lived in a phony state. I retained the majority of our assets, including the property and my retirement savings. She didn't resist at all. I believe she was aware that she had no justification. After hearing the whole tale, our buddies largely agreed with me. Some made an effort to remain impartial, stating that every story has two sides, but they soon vanished. My true buddy took charge, asked me to join them for dinner, kept in touch, and prevented me from isolating myself. I immersed myself into a new project redesigning the claims processing system for a large insurance business. The 70-hour work weeks let me forget about everything. Chester began preparing me for the role of technical director, quicker progress than I had anticipated, but I was prepared. In addition, I shed the 15 pounds I had put on during my marriage by joining a gym and hiring a trainer who kicked my ass 3 times a week. Gained muscle, resumed running, completed a half marathon 6 months following the separation. For a long time, dating was the last thing on my mind. I wasn't prepared when friends tried to set me up. Problems with trust. Don't go away quickly. I was doing well. 6 months after everything happened, the divorce was completed. In addition to getting a promotion at work, the assault charges were resolved with a minor fine. At last, the house felt like mine once more. I completely demolished the master bathroom after renovating and getting rid of anything that made me think of Megan new fixtures and tile. Everything is new. Created a home gym out of the guest bedroom. In the living area, a unique entertainment unit was constructed. The home turned into a project that occupied my hands and helped me concentrate. When I finished, it didn't resemble the apartment where Megan and I had shared a residence. My financial situation was better than it had ever been. Along with a $20,000 pay increase, the promotion included stock options. In addition to opening a separate investment account and making the most of my 401k contributions, I also started researching rental properties as possible sources of income. I was in a better financial situation than most men my age at the age of 28, especially since I didn't have a wife to deplete my finances. Then, unexpectedly, my mother texted me to beg to meet in a downtown diner, stated that she needed to speak with me face-to-face, and that it was crucial I consented to see her when I was having lunch. To be clear, I had just 30 minutes. Once I got to the diner, I regretted coming right away. Mom wasn't by herself. With a baby carrier on the booth seat, Megan sat next to her, looking worn out. I was about to leave when my mother saw me and gave me a frenzied wave. Without bothering to say hello, I strolled over and took a seat across from them. "What is this?" I questioned, staring at my mother. She was polite enough to appear uneasy. She said, "Your father doesn't know I'm here, but I had to speak with you. Ed has been taken into custody. I took notice of that." For what reason was he arrested? He was apprehended stealing funds from the business. Last week, he also received a DUI. Mom's voice cracked as she said, "He might spend a lot of time in prison. I need your assistance to save him." I simply gaped at her in shock. "Do you want me to save the day? The brother who had an affair with my wife caused her to become pregnant and then accused me of assault. Are you crazy?" Upon closer inspection, I noticed that Mom's manicure was cracked and her fancy purse was worn and scratched. Her expenditures must have been stopped by her father. "Well done." Then, in a little voice, Megan said, she pointed to the infant and added, "Ed left us shortly after Lily was born." "I'm not ready to be a father. he added. He was drinking excessively. Occasionally, when he was upset, he would shove me. I didn't feel happy that their relationship had fallen apart. Not sympathy for her predicament. Nothing at all. He struck her. Mom said something like that. Josh, that would somehow make me care. She is presently alone herself with the infant. No work, no help. I gave Megan a glance. And from me? What do you want? She broke down in tears. I'm at a loss on what to do. My parents refused to speak to me with a newborn. I can't work. Our bank account was completely depleted by Ed prior to his imprisonment. I hoped you would be able to assist, until I'm able to stand again. I took a step back and stared at these two ladies who had deceived me and were now pleading with me for assistance because the man they had picked over me turned out to be the complete jerk I had always suspected. Mom gave a nod. Family is helpful. Family, Josh. It nearly made me chuckle when you were assisting them in concealing their affair from me. Where was that sense of family loyalty when you persuaded Megan to attempt to claim this child as her own? Mom remarked, I made a mistake. I'm crying. I believed I was keeping everyone safe. No, your favorite was being protected. Flatly, I replied. And you continue to pick him now despite all that he has done. Mom lowered her voice and leaned forward. Your dad is acting irrationally. All of our accounts are frozen by him. Without his consent, I am unable to access any funds. He is discussing divorce unless I sever all contact with Ed. I think that makes sense. Dad is finally advocating for himself, I replied. I pulled out my wallet and got to my feet. I placed a women's shelter card on the table. Megan, you can get help here, I won't. As for Ed, I don't care if he rots in prison. I glanced at my mother. Never get in touch with me again. Tell Dad that I'm missing him and that he may contact me whenever he wants. I got out of my automobile without turning around. I sat there for a while hoping to sense anything anger, validation, and maybe even sympathy. However, they were no longer my issue. I was doing well without them having rebuilt my life from the ashes they had left behind. Dad gave me a call that evening. He told me he had no intention of aiding Ed and that he had discovered Mom's whereabouts and the reason behind his apology for her actions. We spent about an hour discussing the new woman I'd been seeing the house and work, typical father-son fare. A few months later, I learned from acquaintances that Ed had accepted an 18-month plea agreement for embezzlement. After moving back to her hometown, Megan reportedly made amends with her parents who were now assisting with the kid. In my case, I was promoted to director at work, where I now manage a group of 15 developers. The rental property I purchased is already bringing in a profit. Next summer, I intend to go hiking in Yellowstone for 2 weeks. I've always wanted to do this, but have never had the time. Even if life isn't ideal, I'm still going forward, and I've realized that I'm stronger than I ever imagined. On certain days, that suffices.